Val Bourdos Nichas has strong strategic skills and a thorough understanding of business planning and execution. Companies she worked for over a career of 30 years include the likes of Edgar's, Wimpy and Steers. Her clients include well-known brands as well as numerous startup companies who made use of her out-of-the-box solutions. She is currently the owner of VB and Consultants. Val, thank you so much for joining us in studio.
Hi Candy, thank you very much.
Great.
Good to be here.
Now, what did Oxford University want to determine when they did or conducted the research?
Oxford University, who run the Oxford Strategic Leadership Program, celebrated their 30 years this year, or in fact last year, and they wanted to just see how leadership has evolved over the last 30 years and get a candid insight as to what's important for leaders today. So that's why that research was conducted.
So which qualities then came out tops?
It was quite interesting, and I must say I was quite surprised and also pleased. Right on the top was integrity. The second attribute that was picked out was vision, strategy, and authenticity. And it was quite interesting. Out of the 150 candidates that were interviewed, only 4 rated authority as a top attribute, but integrity came out tops.
Why integrity?
It was quite interesting. I also thought about it, you know, why integrity? And I think the world has changed, and I think because we're all under such pressure with economy and the stressful lives we lead. And I think what's happened is people are looking for purpose and meaning in their lives, individuals as well as companies. And also if you look at Generation Y, they're a different kettle of fish. These guys are looking for meaning. They're looking for a slightly innovative leadership style. They're looking for a lot more collaboration than a hierarchical system. So I think if we look at how the world is changing and how the new leaders are changing, I think integrity is becoming important.
Well, I'm going to change tack here a little bit around the challenge of leadership today. You talk about the new generation and their view on work versus, you know, how perhaps you and I grew up understanding work. There was far more longevity in our time. How do you lead in a time where your employees have a completely different view of what work means to them? It almost seems transitional.
Yes, yeah, it's quite interesting because they do think differently. That young generation aren't going to hang around for 10 years hoping that they're going to get noticed someday. They will leave in 12 months, and it's not about the longevity, it's what they did for you in those 12 months. So I think as a leader, and let's say I'm a baby boomer, so I'm a leader of a different generation, I think if a leader remains in touch with their market or their types of employees, I think that does help. Because I think you deal with a variety of people. It's not just the Generation Y. It's all of them. But I think if you can try and get a little bit of insight into what makes them tick. So for example, Generation Y doesn't want to arrive at work on time, doesn't want to get moaned at because they arrived at 8:05 and not 8 o'clock. They're just interested in the output, and they will be committed. You know, if you give them a project to do, they'll probably work round the clock to get it finished. So I think to answer your question, it's about just having a little bit of an insight and just understanding your target audience, essentially.
Yeah, there's a lot of transformation happening in even the way business is being done now.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. Many years ago, and I think it was probably in about 2000, I was exposed to an office in TBWA where it was almost like a virtual office. So you arrived at your office, you checked in at a concierge, she gave you your phone, everything you needed, and you went to a working spot. You didn't actually have your own office. There were meeting rooms and offices. And apparently it worked for a while, but it didn't have the same atmosphere as an office where there's lots of people. So I think there are pros and cons. But I think because of technology, we probably are all becoming a little bit more mobile. And it's not that essential to have these glam offices where no one's sitting in.
Just to follow up on that then, what is the difference between a transformational leader and a transactional leader?
A lot has been written about transformational leadership, and I was recently exposed to a wonderful model by Richard Olivier. And I think what actually happens, if you can imagine an axis of the outer world and the inner world, and then ego and great self. What happens with a transactional leader, that's very much about the outside, the exterior, the outside world, the ego, and that's very functional. I mean, a lot of good operators work in this domain, which is transactional, and it's very functional. Then what happens, the individual starts transforming, being a bit more self-aware, and self-transformation happens where you combine the inner world and the outer world. So there's more integration about self and what you do. And I've always been a great supporter of executive coaching, where you are looking at self-observation and self-improvement. And I think transformational leaders have integrated their person to their actual function.
But it's always, I mean, the thing is, don't you find cases where you find both, one leader who has those sort of both personalities or concepts, transactional and transformational?
Yes.
That should happen.
Absolutely, and I think the ones that are truly engaged in the business they operate have generally merged the two. But then you get many good operators, but they're quite cold and operational, and they keep away from that inner self. It's a place they don't really want to step into. But I think you just can be just so much more powerful if you can integrate both.
Exactly. Now, talking about integrity,
Yes.
just give us examples or practical examples of when a leader actually practices integrity in business.
Okay. Yeah, I've had some interesting experiences, and I think sometimes you have to have those almost negative experiences to almost reinforce your own value set. I think if I had to look at a couple of examples, I think the first one is about nurturing partnerships. And the two examples I can give you are, the one is about pricing. You know, we always pricing services or product, and I think there's opportunity to have more transparency in business with open book pricing, and for people to realize that partnerships are about a win-win. So if you nurture that relationship and that supplier, it's got a lot more longevity. The second example in terms of nurturing partnership is what happens in the advertising industry, where people just hire and fire ad agencies at a whim, and it takes a lot of work to appoint agencies. And my view is rather be transparent with your agency, rather sit around a table, thrash it out. Life is not a perfect world, just nurture relationships. So that would be my first one. My second one is one that I love. It's about having the courageous conversation. And I think often senior management are embarking on change, or they're not happy with certain performance, etc. But they disappear into a corner and are not brave enough to have that courageous conversation with the individual. So I would definitely encourage people to build on integrity, is have that conversation. It's hard, and often people don't because there's fear. And then finally, I think the other important thing is to just be transparent in your actions. So you'll get certain individuals that will work in a clandestine fashion. They won't be upfront. So let's say, for example, there's no stock of this water in store. The upright leader will say, I heard there's no water in the Santon store, won't you go and sort out what's happening? The clandestine leader will say, how are we with the stock in the with water? And they won't actually reveal that they have knowledge that a store's run out. And that happens. I've experienced that myself personally with individuals. So my final suggestion would be just be transparent in your actions.
And obviously that's almost in the real world. But ideally, I mean, do you think we'll get to a situation where someone as a business individual will say, listen, I'm not going to engage with you because I don't think you're a person of integrity? We'll get to that point.
Yeah, look, I think we're always going to have a combination of types of businesses, those with lots of integrity and those without. But business are made up of people, and people are about relationships. And I think naturally types of relationships will gravitate towards those types that share the value. But I think because of needs, sometimes we compromise. You know, we put up with partnerships or relationships where we compromise because we need them. So I think you're always going to probably have a combination, but I think there's a heightened awareness of ethics and just doing business the right way.
Well, Val, thank you so much.
Thank you, Candy, and thanks, Alon. Thank you.
Now for the MTN Business Quick Tip of the Week.
The first thing is to find the motivation, to be honest, to connect with the big reason why you want to go through that journey, because sometimes being honest brings tough truths to the surface, and it's really tough to face. But if you've got a worthwhile reason that's bigger than the challenge of facing the tough truths, the chances you'll go there first or more often. So in terms of honesty, the other side is to think about, if someone else was doing what you were doing, what feedback would you give them? What things would you ask them about? What things would you bring to their attention, where we often can see the flaws and errors in someone else, but it's very hard to see it in ourselves. The third tactic or tip is to be able to ask yourself the question, what do I need to do to like and respect myself more? And if the answer is honesty on that path, then you can literally feed that positive self-esteem, feed that positivity, and that'll lead you on a path of more self-awareness, open to more things, which lead to more growth, more happiness, and eventually more performance.
Remember, if you have friends or family who are working or living overseas, they can watch the program on their computers. Tell them to go to www.summit.co.za, click on the Big Small Business Show on the left of the screen, and they'll see a button to view this program again or look at previous episodes. Now, on this site, you also find the entry form to apply for a Race Corps bursary to the value of 250,000 Rand. Alon, it's that time of the show. What's your take?
Kenny, today was about values. Values are a very important part of growing a business, and entrepreneurs need to be very clear as to what their values are. There are a couple of tips I want to give entrepreneurs out there around understanding their values, because everyone talks about values, but for me it's quite a fuzzy topic. So the first thing that you have to do is understand what's important to you as an entrepreneur and be very clear as to what you will and will not do. So I'll give you an example that happened to me in terms of at Race Corps. We were offered a huge job in the hundreds of millions of rands by a big corporate, but it meant that we had to sacrifice some of our values in order to get that business. One of our values was that we, for example, that we always select, and that's that's part of our value system, is that we choose the right entrepreneurs because we believe that that's the right way to build entrepreneurs. So they didn't want us to do that. And it became the actual deciding factor. They said, if you don't get rid of your selection process, we can't give you this big deal. And I sat with my exco, and we all sat in a room, and a 200 million Rand deal is a big deal for a business like ourselves. Imagine. And without one single failure, every single one of my exco voted against doing the deal, which gave me huge comfort that they understood our values. But we need to go beyond that, from your exco understanding your values to actually every single staff member knowing your values. And the great way to do that for entrepreneurs is to actually tell the stories, let them understand the stories which illustrate how you actually live your values. Absolutely, and on point. Great stuff. Well, we love hearing from you, so do send us your comments and suggestions. Maybe you've been watching the program, playing with the idea to feature on the show. Maybe you haven't. Remember, who dares wins. Send us an email and let's see if you get onto this show. Well, the address to send the mail, of course, is thebigsmall@summit.co.za, and we'd love to hear from you. Till next week, take care. And goodbye from me too. And remember, if you think it, write it down and make it reality.